interesting to me seeing these tools pop up where, you know, people have tried their hand. Like, I think Webflow is a really good example. It's like, oh, yeah, typically these efficiency gains have been developer-led. Let's try to make it a little bit easier for people to learn development. My honest take, somebody's going to want to own the tool space because whoever can own that space is going to make bank. Like, that's just, you know, you got people with their ecosystems and they're always going to, you know, you've got the Adobes and you've got the Microsofts that want you in the ecosystem. A lot of us are dealing with a lot of deadlines that would have never been possible before.
Yeah.
And when we're dealing with deadlines that have never been possible before, we're always going to be pushing those deadlines to be shorter. So I think that's also where a lot of the impatience comes from, you know, at least for me, like, man, I have this deadline. I wish I wasn't spending my time doing this task, this redundant task in this tool.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Modus Operandi. I am welcome again, always, by the very special guest, Noelle Lansford. And today we are going to have a very deep talk about many different subjects. So welcome, Noelle.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be here. Very excited. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but today, on the day of recording, is Valentine's Day. So I'm excited for anything and everything that could be happening. I bet there's lots of fun foods in our future today, but I'm so excited to be spending the morning here on this podcast, here on this YouTube channel. So I'm excited to get started with some fun topics.
Oh, brilliant. Noelle, your voice sounds very different.
Yeah. Yes, today I have my sultry voice because it's Valentine's Day, but also because it's the morning for me, and my voice is always deeper in the morning. And so it sounds crazy. Hello, everybody. It's welcome.
You're gonna entice our audience today, definitely.
Happy Valentine's Day, everybody.
Oh man, well, yeah, audience, you can tell she has a very raspy voice, you know.
That's
So
right.
yeah, I'm gonna make her speak all the way through this podcast. So
Amazing.
No, I'm gonna hit it off. So when we last spoke, we were speaking a lot about, you know, generally about design systems, and you know, you coming on the show, we have that kind of connection about the design front and the development front. Now, since we spoke, and that was near enough during Christmas, we kind of last spoke, there has been a massive explosion in the use of no-code development tools.
Yeah.
Such as Lovable, Replit, what's the other one? Cursor, which is a really big one at the moment. And I want to get your take on this. Now, look, I've held back from having an AI podcast or just talking about AI, but I think it warrants now to really bring up this conversation about this. Now, what's your take on these kind of no-code software that's out there?
Yeah. So I'll be honest, I haven't tried a lot of the AI no-code options that are out there. I've tried some of the like Figma AI helpers that are just kind of baked in. As far as non-AI no-code options, the two that I've been most familiar with and have firsthand experience with would be Webflow and Framer. I just recently was able to use Framer and I was very pleasantly surprised by it. Now, there's a lot to consider in there. It depends on what you're looking for. I think my main concern, and I think most people's main concern with a lot of the no-code tool options is just the accessibility of whatever is under the hood of like what the code generates to be.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're honestly okay because you have kind of pre-built blocks, and whenever you're dealing with those pre-built blocks, I've seen those tools put a fair amount of effort into making sure that those options are accessible, and sometimes it makes it a little bit more limiting to work with, but you know, kind of at the benefit of getting some more accessible code more often in there rather than it being like this completely custom thing where depending on what your user kind of does with those drag and drop options is generating some weird code. So I would love your take on maybe some of the AI options as well, that you're seeing and maybe have had some experience with.
Guess I've just been messing around with Replit. So I've
Hmm.
just been like trying it out and really seeing how easy it is to build something. And, we both of us come from that development background. We know how long it just takes to build just a simple page or
Hmm.
a simple web page that involves some form of backend. Now, you know that, yeah, there has to be some code cadence. There has to be the right framework. It has to be the right front end framework. There has to be, the list goes on and on and on. And what I've noticed is that you can thrash out something very, very quick.
Hmm.
Um, and the reason why I brought this up, or the reason why it's such a big thing for me at the moment, is a lot of companies are swaying down this route
Mm.
to, get something quickly to production, or
Yeah.
even just get something quickly to testing, to then verify with their users and et cetera, et cetera.
Mm.
So I guess and the reason also why I bring this up, there was a post the other day where somebody had mentioned a company had been using Replit,
Hmm.
and they're using it for the ideation stage where they can literally
Mm.
prompt something,
Yeah.
get something up and rolling, and then from there the developers and designers can iterate
Mm.
further on that.
Yeah.
Now, just to get to that initial stage of creating something which is just, internal, and, pretty rough, pretty half
Hmm.
baked, that is cutting down a lot of business resources just to get from A to B right now. And that's why I think my take on this is that over the next 6 months, we're going to see a massive intake on this,
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
That's super interesting. I mean, that seems like a pretty um insightful prediction given most of the designers that I know and even developers are starting to get agitated towards Figma, I would say.
mhm.
There's a growing agitation towards Figma as a tool. So that could be an interesting thing that people end up trying. I wonder, and this is, doomsday me talking a little bit. Do you predict that if people like designers or developers start showing things that are actually coded and technically in production,
Mhm.
that the cleanup time to get it to market might be a bit stunted? It's a leading question. That's kind of what my fear with it would be.
Give me some context for that.
Yeah. So my thought is if I went to a stakeholder and I showed them an idea and they happen to really like it and it's all
Mhm.
been generated very quickly with AI tools, there might not be a refinement period built in.
Yeah, I mean, there's a flip because right
Hmm.
now people are a bit wary to take something that's prompted,
Hmm.
in a code tool and straight push it to production. I think we're far away from that. My prediction, and I could be right and I could be wrong. My prediction is that we're going to see a massive change in our day-to-day work.
Hmm.
So, and I'll take it from a design perspective. I perceive that designers are going to take a more strategic
Hmm.
aspect in the product table rather than an execution
Hmm.
aspect. Now, I'll give you my 2 cents in here. I've just been messing around with some AI UX tools. There's many out there. I'll just throw out some names just on top of it so everyone can start looking at it. UX Pilot, that's really good. Obviously lovable, as I just mentioned. AI UX Patterns, Bolt.new, which is really big at the moment. And these are just, AI prompting design tools where you can literally build
Hmm.
out something from the forefront. And I think what's going to happen, and again, it's just my prediction or just my assumption, I think what we're going to see is UX now moving to that top table, and that
Mm,
execution work will be done by AI. Um, I personally think the days of Figma are going to be running out very,
mm.
very soon, because everyone is now starting to move into this prompt way of design and prompt engineering, prompt development, you name it. So, I mean, what's your take on it?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's super interesting to hear you talk about this. I think the worlds in which I've been living in have been like super Figma heavy, and so the frustrations of Figma are very evident in the work
Hmm.
that I'm doing.
Yeah.
And so, there's just certain limitations in, I people that are like kind of just getting into design systems, a lot of times they'll ask me like, "Oh, so how do you get, like the stuff from Figma into code?" And I'm like, man, I wish I had a really simple answer for you.
Yeah.
And so I think those limitations in Figma, not, and honestly, the closest that I got to that was Framer, but that's, only for web technology at the moment. And I was actually really impressed with Framer's ability to execute on designs in Figma very quickly as well, even without AI. Just the other month, I worked with a client and, we already had a standing relationship, so I know what they needed. So the discovery period is really short, but we were able to spin up a marketing site, a whole marketing site, in a week,
Wow.
without the use of AI. But it was because Framer was so good at being able to handle all of these nuances of code. And that would be crazy to me. And like I didn't touch code the whole time that I did it, and it also wasn't a frustrating experience. It felt like a very familiar experience. Felt very similar. They've done a good job tailoring it towards people that are used to Figma, so that a designer could produce good code. Obviously, I have some advantage there
Yeah.
with thinking about it from kind of a development side too, but. I don't know. I was very impressed by that timeline of getting something from concept to live in a week. That was very stunning to me.
Do you think like that's where we're moving? Because like Framer is a very, very good example. You
Hmm.
know, before Framer, there was Webflow, and Webflow was still, I would say, development
Yes,
orientated,
I would
you
totally
know?
agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really, really more development orientated. Whereas Framer, as you mentioned, it's literally, oh, I can drag this box, I can make
Hmm.
this bigger, I can make it this responsive, you
Yeah,
know,
you
it,
have this big free canvas,
yeah,
and I think that's makes a big difference with like
yeah.
how people look at it.
But this is it. So then it comes down to my question: are we going to see more tools? Okay, let's take away the AI
Hmm.
bit for
Yeah.
for a second. Are we going to see the rise of more tools attuned to a designer than to development from your perspective?
Hmm. I wonder about this because I think this is some spicy take on just the design
Uh,
system community in general.
yeah.
But I think that designers have had to, in the design system space especially, think a lot more cross-disciplinary, and that usually kind of attracts people that are cross-disciplinary, that field. Um, but it's kind of gotten to this point where I feel like sometimes the design community often is reinventing things that developers have had access to for a very long time, just
Okay.
by being able to code. You know what I mean? Like I
Yeah.
remember when like everybody was so excited on one of the Figma drops where they introduced like if-then statements in Figma, and everybody was like, design has had this moment where we get if-then statements. And like I remember the developer who was like co-presenting on that config was like, yeah, it's great, guys. I'm so glad you're on board with if-then statements. That's crazy. But but yeah, I feel like there's been kind of these like, I don't know, almost conning designers into like having to think like a developer. And it's led to a lot more, like you're saying, really strategic conversations. And so I definitely do see like there's a lot more conversations happening around, designers really, really heavily being involved in the product roadmap, things being
Yeah.
a lot more design driven. Like it has to start with design to get it to development. Whereas before, I think a lot of these more like efficiency gains and optimization gains were traditionally developer led. But
Yes.
now we're really thinking about like design as an efficiency tool, or a means to make the whole company, especially when you're working on design systems, it's this like enablement team for design.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's a lot more strategic, than, creating a flat image of a design to hand off, right? So yeah, it is interesting to me seeing these tools pop up where, people have tried their hand. Like I think Webflow is a really good example. It's like, oh yeah, typically these efficiency gains have been developer led. Let's try to make it a little bit easier for people to learn development. And then you have
Mm.
a tool like Framer that's like, okay, let's skip the development like headspace and keep people in design and kind of compensate for where people are at and just convert it for them and like let them be a design strategist but be able to execute more complex code interactions, and give them some under the hood access to that as well.
This is it. You mentioned, and I'll take 2 steps back where you just mentioned design being more of a strategic aspect, because this hasn't happened in Europe. No, we're still in, we're always behind America. Europe is always kind of behind America on the tech curve. But, design is not considered as part of a product strategic roadmap. It's,
Mm.
if you look at the Agile Manifesto, design was not thought about in there. It was only
Mm-hmm.
about development, and
Yeah.
design has had to kind of push itself in
Right.
to try and get itself there. And let me try and take this question in a better way. Do you think now that designers, because, designers had to always wear multiple hats,
Mm-hmm.
being in this industry, do you think that designers now are going to be more pushed to really understand development as
Mm-hmm.
part of their core skill set?
Yeah, I do. And I think that they're also going to be pushed to learn more about the business as well.
Yeah.
I think it's getting really like when we started seeing job titles change to product designer in versus like even like web designer or UX designer or UI designer, like I feel like those kind of used to mean a specific niche, but
Yeah.
product design, at least what I see of it, it's like we want you to be an all-in-one business leader, development,
Yeah.
kind of liaison. We want you to be able to design the user flows. We want you to be able to study the analytics. We want you to have UX research baked in. We want you to have the UI. So it's kind of like all of this. And it feels like even at the larger enterprises, it feels like a startup role
Mhm.
based on the job description. It's
Yeah.
like this jack of all trades kind of person, that maybe has a specialization, but is willing to, go around all of the other skill sets that are, kind of necessary for where the role is positioned within the company.
Yeah. But I remember this from our first podcast that we done together. I remember this because it's one of the, love this statement that you mentioned. It's like, I become a designer and then I go on LinkedIn and I now need to know about the business. Then I need to know about development. Now I need to know about
Exactly.
research. And do you think right now the the job the job in itself, do you think it's just too diluted in a generalist aspect?
Yeah, I think, well, and that's kind of so yeah, to tie this back into the AI thing too, this is where like I think designers are right now being pushed towards a more strategic role, and that would be lined up from a business perspective to line up with like what I think business leaders are largely looking for out of AI, which is to have people as strategists and AI as kind of more the repetitive work that is time consuming. But I think my concern with some of that is like everybody's been made to be a generalist, and so it almost makes me wonder. I'm like, if you look like way into the future and everybody's, like
Why is your eyes
the
like that? Why is
right,
your
you gotta
eye-
look really far. You gotta look really far into the future. Probably not that far, but I'm thinking about like developers also having AI assistants with code, and
Yes.
things like that too. And I'm like, this is a kind of a weird thing to think about because, you're looking for strategists on the development side too. You're looking for strategists on the designer side. But if everybody's had to be so cross-disciplinary, whatever, I don't know, like, I guess the pessimistic side of me is like, are we just going to have kind of like generalist strategists in a room trying to manage their AI tools together?
No, oh, wait, that is brilliant. I just posted up something today, literally, just before our podcast. And I mentioned, are we going to now move into a future where we are hired based on how well we can build agentic AI?
Mm,
Is it going to be like a skill set like Microsoft Word? Like,
mm.
can you use Microsoft Word? And are we going to move into a future where you're hired based on how good your agentic AI is coming with you? What's
Yeah.
your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that there's going to be companies that really push for that. I do. And I think that there's also a lot of legacy companies that to get to that point, it will take a long time.
Yes. Yeah.
Because I even think about the best practices that are just like super standard now, with web and apps and whatever. But it's like, you still got companies running M.dot sites. So I don't know.
Yeah.
So it's like, there's part of me that's like, yeah, that'll probably happen pretty shortly here with a lot of companies. But then there's also going to need to be people that still know how to keep transferring things to new things and maintain the old things because they're just running fine. And
Yeah.
some companies aren't going to move. And so I don't know. I mean, I feel like there is going to be this tension almost between skill sets. And I remember kind of thinking that when I was working a more like Gen AI oriented job, this feeling of, oh, the skill sets that I'm building here are really transferable to anybody else working on this. But to go back is more, it's not as transferable just as like a generalist. And I remember kind of being like, oh, I'm getting in this like AI niche. I'm losing some of this generalist knowledge, but it's interesting because it's like, oh, do you still need to retain that generalist knowledge to kind of retain like a strategist position once AI would be then implemented, but the implementation stage of it is kind of specific too.
I mean, it's a scary one because, most designers and developers, they're not used to being in a strategic role. They're used to being executioners. That's what
Mm,
a lot of developers, a lot of designers who are not in that kind of maturity level have been subjugated to really being, okay, we execute on demand. And
mm,
that's why I think, and again, this is just theories, this is just assumptions. I think with the use of agentic AI coming in, or AI just coming in general, I perceive that a lot of the people that have been hired to do execution roles
mm-hmm.
could tend to lose their jobs.
Right.
And these people that were more on the strategic aspect, or people that are moving into a strategic
Yeah.
aspect, will start to be hired more and seeing the value of design from a strategic perspective.
Yeah, yeah. And I generally would agree with that trend. I think that trend would be accurate. I think I have developer friends that talk about this too of like, hey, the code generation is getting really good. All I really have to do is know enough about code to kind of go back and edit it, make sure there's nothing, bad in there, make sure that the privacy and everything is good, whatever. Um, and so you still need to understand it, but it is this weird transition point, I think, for people that are just coming into the industry that haven't had a lot of experience doing the firsthand stuff, and it's not second nature for what to look for.
Hmm.
That's something that I think about a lot too, and I think about that in design as well. Like, oh my goodness, would I love to like auto generate a design system and just work with it from there? Great. And I can, prompt it to give me, design tokens and components that are closer to the needs versus, taking an existing design system and pulling it down, but it's something that I can just iterate on just with a
Yeah.
AI assistant. I think that would be really great, but I guess it's because I have experience doing it myself as well, and I know exactly what to look for
Yeah.
to go back and make adjustments really quickly. So I am curious to see as it progresses with
Yeah.
new people if it's actually as big of a time saver.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because there's going to be a learning curve of what to look for, how to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. There's still going to have to be some level of allowing people to be implementers to then become a strategist. And so I'm really curious to what's going to happen to those entry level to mid level positions and how people are going to handle it. Because I think there's already stress there on what to
Yeah.
do with those roles in the industry. I think a lot of people are like, not as right now. I think especially with market, I'm hoping to see this, change. I think everybody is, but there's just so many people looking for entry level jobs and
Yeah.
companies aren't offering a lot of them. People aren't investing
True.
as much into those positions. And I'm kind of a little bit concerned about that with like, yeah, just go straight to strategist. It's like that's going to
Yeah.
be really hard to pull off long term, like sustainably as an industry.
Yeah. No, I think that discussion on what's happening with entry level jobs at the moment is a really, really, it's such, how'd you say, I can't put my fingers on it really. It's businesses are not looking to take the time to train people up. You
Hmm.
know, you just heard what happened in Meta the other week. So it's like, um, there's a lot of changes that are just happening across the board. And let me take one step back. You mentioned with building a design system, yeah, and me and you know this inside out. Building a design system, just not on a design. I'm not just talking about the adoption from
Hmm.
a design perspective, but the adoption and code cadence and cleanliness
Hmm.
from a development perspective. From my experience, that is where a lot of the time is really invested in a
Hmm.
DPM role. It's like you're checking to make sure the code is correct. If the component is used in the right way,
Hmm.
has it been changed? Has there been any variations, etc., etc.? And that's a lot of a brunt work
Yeah.
that goes into there. Um, and that's my take. Do you think that with these use of AIs, that we're going to start seeing all this brunt work being done, and where we can be a bit more creative
Right.
and a bit more strategic, as we
I
keep
know.
using that
I'd love
word?
it. I'd love to see it. I'll be
Yeah,
honest. Because, I mean, I
yeah.
remember, and there was, this was kind of early in the Figma days too. This was before like Figma had all of its fancy options with like the variables and, well, not
Mhm.
variables. They have variables. Well, now they have two variables.
Or
So,
just variations, or
yeah, variations. They had styles. They didn't have Booleans. They didn't have instant swap kind of
Mhm.
when it first came out. And I remember I made, I think it was like 516 button variations for one design system. And I remember thinking, this is dumb. Why am I?
Yeah.
Why did why?
Yeah. You should have
Like,
questioned yourself. Should have questioned yourself after you got to like 50. Like,
I
what am I
know,
doing?
I know, but it's like you have primary, secondary, tertiary, and then one
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
styled like a link because
yeah,
we all do it. And then you
yeah,
want an icon on the left and an icon on the right. And then you got hover states, focus states, and active states. And it's like that blows up real quick if
yeah,
you don't have all of those little, side things. And even now, I think it's too much because it's like, okay, now you still have to do the primary, secondary, primary, and now you
yeah,
put in
yeah,
the Boolean and this is blah, 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 blah. And it's like, how many times have we made a button? Can we just not, can we just
yeah.
auto generate that and then tweak it and, make sure the construction of it is solid and, build it with our tokens and things like that. And it's like,
Man,
like
it's
that's definitely the brunt work on the design side. And it's like,
man.
feels
Imagine that
yeah,
on the development side. It's like, so,
totally.
you know, within the last like 2-3 minutes, you've already like spoke about brunt work, which again, we're just frustrated with it.
Hmm.
We've been in this field for a while. So it's like, oh, why would I want to do that again?
Hmm.
But then like, with building a design system from scratch, you're going to have to do this. And this is where I think we're moving into that stage of, we're becoming more lazy. That's the
Yeah.
truth. Yeah. in becoming more lazy in doing all the brunt work, you can start to see we free ourselves up for more creativity and, as you say, I don't want to keep using the word strategic, but I just put it that we'll be much more efficient to the business from a business value standpoint rather than from a execution standpoint.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, totally. And I think, you know, I say this a lot, but design systems are 90% people. And I'd rather spend my time there because that's what is actually time consuming. Like, you know, I've gotten pretty fast at making components or making, you know, like actually going through Figma files and doing whatever. You know, if that could be even faster, that's great because I'm just speed running that to get to some sort of agreement between people. And, you know, I have to have a visual representation for people to react to, and some kind of prototype for people to react to get to the agreement part of it, to figure out what I'm actually going to do in the architecture, how I'm actually going to manage a system. But yeah, it's being able to speed run that even more would be great because it takes a lot of time to get all of the right people looking at all of the right things at the right, you know, levels. And yeah, I don't know. I think that could be a nice stage of maturity. I think some people on the topic of AI in design systems I know are, I've heard that it's not quite there yet. A lot of times, maybe I haven't looked at it in a minute, but the last time I was talking to people about this, they didn't feel like it was quite there with just being able to like visually generate stuff that was, you know, up to par with what they wanted. But other people were finding that there was some help in creating kind of an AI that was specific, like an AI assistant that was specific to their design system for their consumers to like be able to quickly kind of get information on like which component should I use in this situation, you know, stuff like that. That's more situational. I haven't seen anybody publicly show that. I don't know, you know. I haven't gotten able to play with it personally, but I have seen some people talking about that on like their kind of like consumer doc site, a way to kind of integrate that. So I think that's an interesting use case for it.
Enjoying the content? Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on LinkedIn, TikTok, and Instagram for more updates. Your support helps us bring you even more great content. Now let's get back to our podcast.
I love the point that you just made a second ago. A lot of people think, you know, building design systems is just creating components. It's not. It's really the case of you're building a community. And I think we spoke about this on our last podcast together, whether to have a federated or centralized system.
Yeah.
But it really does come down to you're building a community within your teams to understand how you're going to use things, how things are going to be created. And again, there's only a small percentage in the design and coding. Do you know what I mean? I love that. I really, really love that. And that's a really good example that you just brought up. Like I can ask the AI, oh, how do I use this component in this situation? That's brilliant.
Yeah. And I would love to see that. And just documentation in general, I've been talking about this kind of recently, is like, I feel like we are beyond the point where we need to document exactly what a button or a checkbox is. I think I think there's a lot of places that document that, you know, like just link out to MDN if you need to learn what a checkbox is. I'm all for it. You know, have it right there. Be like, hey, if you want the official guidelines on what a checkbox or a button is, here you go. It's been written before. They're going to keep it updated, but I'm all for adding context around how do you use it at this organization. And I think the more context clues we can give that way, you know, if you end up wanting to do more AI generation type stuff with your doc site, you're much more set up to actually have context about when and why to use it very specifically. So I don't know. I think, you know, AI benefits aside, moving more towards that documentation is a little bit more forward thinking and helpful for people versus this is a button. This is what a button does. It's like, you know what I mean?
I really, oh my God, I've seen a lot of design systems that build like that. And you're just like, why? Give me the context. When do I use this over there?
Yeah.
You know, I'm going to take another stab at this, what you just mentioned, and documentation being a very, very good example. I've noticed, and even with myself, since AI has become part of my day-to-day work, or I've been using it, I have noticed that I read more, and I'm better at articulating through written, because I've been learning prompt engineering, I've been learning, et cetera, et cetera. And I've noticed that, especially with documentation, which is, we all hate doing documentation. Nobody loves it. Do you think that we are going to go down the route of being much more stringent in our documentation to then feed into these models going forward? What's your thoughts?
I think that would be interesting. I'd love to see some like kind of examples of it. But, I think there could be a benefit of like having a human facing documentation site where you're much more concise, you're making things really easy to find, it's very scannable, there's a lot of information but not too much information such that you have to weed through a bunch of things to get to it. But where I don't know, it'd be interesting to see if you just have a lot of extra information to dump of like, oh, if this is your exact situation, or we see this happen a lot of times, whatever, adding that as knowledge for some more like situational chat. I don't know. That's super interesting. I wonder how, like, what the time benefit would be on that versus like just answering someone's question. I don't know what time saver would end up being on it. I think a lot of it would probably depend on like how many design system consumers you're servicing would probably be a big piece of how beneficial that might be. But yeah, I do think that's super interesting. I mean, like, even I'm thinking about our team that I'm working with right now, and we keep a big document of asked questions, and we answer them in that document. And it doesn't necessarily go directly to our doc site, but we kind of have this list of banked questions that we get that we have a standard answer to, just so that we remember what we've been telling other people, we're consistent across what we're telling everyone, and so that we can, not to be impersonal, but to just be able to quickly get people their answers. And I think about situations like that where it's like, okay, that's not on our doc site, that's just something we do as an efficiency gain. Why wouldn't we just throw it in and see, if people are able to use that information a bit more personally and contextually?
Yeah, I like that one. I've never thought about it from a design perspective. We've always told developers to keep some form of documentation, because they always say, oh, look at this site. And they always say one thing to one person and one thing to another person. And we're like, hey, keep a centralized place where you can get those kind of frequently asked questions, and this is the answer you should give. X, Y, Z. And I like you do it from a design perspective. I've never thought it from that point of view. Oh man, look, it's really coming up to the end of the podcast. Like, we've been speaking. It's always the case with me.
We never have enough time.
We never have enough time to speak. And I think, no, we can still go on. I wanna still get your take on this. Do you think, from your perspective right now, that we're going to see many applications being, how can I put this in a better way? Do you think that with the use of, and I'll go back to the initial kind of thing, do you think with the use of these no-code prompting tools that we will lose the ability to have some form of framework or code cadence or code practice in our industry because there's going to be all these tools going forward? Now, let me put it in a better perspective. You remember when there was this, we're around the same age, I think. I hope so.
Maybe we'll never know.
Maybe. You must have gone through that thing of, oh yes, Angular versus React versus Vue. Okay, so you remember the argument of which software to use.
Yeah.
Now, with these tools that are coming in, that are just basically using whatever's based on what's been prompted, do you think that this technology clash is just going to stop, and it's just going to be what is the best tool to use?
I don't know. I just feel like and this is a funny take, and then I'll give you my serious take. I just think developers are too opinionated to pick one tool. I really do. Because honestly, I still talk to developers that are, only React, only Angular. I'm like, okay, cool. And I feel like
wait, hold on. If that's because developers have choice right now, when Figma and Sketch and Adobe XD was all in that kind of say, the designers were the same. It's like, oh, I use XD, but then I use Sketch. So it's because Figma is just the only one at the moment. They don't have any other choice. But yeah, going back to your answer, go for it.
Yeah, no, totally. And I mean, true. Designers are, not to say designers aren't opinionated. Who thinks designers are opinionated? Whatever.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I don't know. I just don't know that. I mean, my honest take, somebody's going to want to own the tool space, because whoever can own that space is going to make bank. Like, that's just, you got people with their ecosystems, and they're always going to, you got the Adobes and you've got the Microsofts that want you in the ecosystem. And so, I mean, I definitely think there's going to be a lot of companies racing to own the market and like have people like, this is the tool. But I don't know. I think that having options is a little bit healthier. Because, you get to, like, going back to that strategist position, you're not boxed in because of your tool. And that's where I feel like we're at a bit now with Figma, is people are just kind of putting up with it, but they know that they don't actually want to set up their projects that way, that they are upset about a lot of the limitations. And, honestly, I think it's because we're a bit spoiled. A lot of the tools in Figma are like the best we've ever had in the industry. But now, like you said, I think we're getting kind of spoiled, and we're like, I want something better, and I want something faster, and I want it now.
But that's it.
Yeah.
Have we become impatient? Have we become, that's why it goes back to what I just mentioned ago. I've become much more efficient in my writing, efficient in reading, but I've also become much more impatient due to how quick things are. And that ties into what you're just saying. Are we moving so quick that even the speed of what we deliver and what we create and what we develop is also going to be a factor into what tools we choose? Right.
And, I think a lot of us are dealing with a lot of deadlines that would have never been possible before.
Yeah.
And when we're dealing with deadlines that have never been possible before, we're always going to be pushing those deadlines to be shorter. So I think that's also where a lot of the impatience comes from, at least for me, of like, man, I have this deadline. I wish I wasn't spending my time doing this task, this redundant task in this tool, because it needed done yesterday, and it's like this, like, kind of aggressive churn mentality that I don't think is always healthy. I don't think it always produces the best product. I think leaving a little bit of time for human craft and a little bit of human redundancy is really important, because it's part of strategy. I don't think like I can just totally isolate my brain to only be a strategist without doing at least some of the work. And I think there's some value in that. I don't think I need to do all of the work and touch every little thing, but just being able to think through the problem by doing is such a big part of design that, that's something that I would want to figure out how to retain an aspect of that, and like give space to that versus just that really aggressive churn that's kind of cultivating a lot of impatience.
Man, when we speak again and we have this kind of arrangement, I would love to get your take in that. I would really love to see how aggressive the market is going due to the fact of efficiency with AI. Are they pushing for the deadlines to be even much more closer than what it is? Because most people, and I'll give you my 2 cents. Most people work in a quarterly cadence, unless you have a CI/CD or a micro front end architecture where you can keep deploying and deploying. Majority of companies I know, even enterprise, are still working in that Q1, Q2, Q3 solution space. So I'm going to bring that one up with you. And this, we have our chat spaced out. So it will be definitely an interesting talk and see how things are moved in the next time we speak.
Absolutely.
So,
It might get philosophical because I have a lot of thoughts on just like cultivating human boredom in our current culture.
okay.
It's like I think boredom's really important. I don't think
Yes.
we're bored enough.
Yeah, no. Oh my God, man. I love that one because, me being a parent,
Yeah.
I was actually speaking to my friend. He has, a child as well. And I was saying, you got to teach your kids how to deal with boredom,
Mm,
that they don't go to a screen and start looking at a
yeah.
screen and because they're bored. You got to let them be bored to
Yeah.
build creativity. That's how
Yeah.
they use their imagination. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And because he was asking me like about my kids. And sorry to go off topic.
No, I think it's totally on topic because I mean, we're all a kid at heart and we all deal with this.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I brought my kids, the whole entourage, all five of them. I brought them to a dinner, and their family, or my friend and his family, was so amazed with my kids because they were just sitting at the table and
Yeah.
they didn't have a tablet, they didn't have mobile because I'm totally against that stuff.
Yeah.
And he was like, "How did you do it?" And I was like, "Dude, you just don't give them a screen. It's as simple as
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
You teach them how to deal with boredom for them to be creative. Do you know what I mean?"
Yeah, totally. Well, and I think I feel defensive towards that. Like, I don't have kids, but I think about that, like when I see, little kids, really tied to a device, I don't have any room to talk about any parenting techniques, but I do have a sense of kind of sadness a lot of times
Hmm.
because I'm just like,
Yes.
man, it's like, and I feel like every generation has to go through this of being like, what's happening?
No.
But a little bit because, I didn't have to deal with that as a kid, that
Yes.
level of distraction. But it really makes me self-reflective as well of like, okay, just because I didn't grow, like I feel sad on behalf of, maybe a kid that I see that's distracted by this, but like, my gosh, that's totally what I do to myself. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And it's
No,
like,
I agree.
I feel defensive towards the people that are younger than me, but then when I look at myself, I excuse it. And, I think that contrast is really interesting. And I think it's totally in the workplace as well of,
Yeah.
not necessarily scrolling on your phone at work, but just like the amount of churn that we expect almost out of like not being able to be bored. Like it's always got to be the next thing. And
Yeah.
sometimes that's how I feel about AI a little bit of just like introducing AI where it doesn't belong. It's like, well, I don't know. Everybody has a sparkle on their website. We need one too. It's like,
Yeah.
do we
No.
actually?
I totally agree. And I love that point that you just made. Like, I think the reason why I do it to my kids is because I know how I am right now
Mhm.
with devices, with electrical, information just coming to me all day long. And, one thing I told my kids is don't work on computers. I've
Mm.
basically said to them, I do not want you to have a job where you're sitting at a computer. I think
You're
it's
right.
the most unhealthiest job in the world. And, the audience will probably hate me for this, but I personally
No, I
think that,
think that's great. I love
yeah,
it.
it's like, I've told them this is not the job for you. We're meant to be outside. We're meant to be
Mhm.
walking. We're meant to be, working the earth and everything. But
Yeah.
this job, no, it's definitely
I
not
would
the
have
one.
totally agreed with you as a kid. That's so funny. This is a little backstory. And shout out to my mom because she's great and she deserves a
Nice.
shout out at some point. She just really, really tried to teach me how to type. I mean, she
Okay.
really went above and beyond to try to teach me how to type. I was not going to have it as a kid. I said to my mom, Mom, I'm never going to work at a computer. I'm never going to need to know how to type. I'm going to be like a farmer outside. I'm never going to need. And I had to learn how to type in college. And, it's my mom's
Oh,
biggest I told you so. Cause I just, like, I was so adamant about this that I hand wrote all of my essays and, I would have somebody else transcribe them like that. I was that dedicated to not typing. Cause I was so convinced that I would never do a computer job. I was so disinterested in it.
oh, look where we are. Look where we're both
There we are.
are.
And I've got the carpal tunnel to prove it, It's,
Oh,
it's not.
this is what I'm saying. Carpal tunnel, backache.
Oh, I
You
know.
name it.
It's
You name it.
crazy.
So,
It's crazy.
oh man. Well, Noelle, it's always a pleasure to speak to you. There's so much from today's discussion where I can dissect and we can just keep going on. But yeah, when we next speak, I would love to get your take on where we are with how fast we're pushing, because it's moving so fast. It's literally moving so fast.
Yeah, and I even feel like the companies that aren't, super invested in AI yet are already moving so fast. So I think we have a lot to talk about with timelines and where the industry is at with pushing for deadlines. And I think budgets and timelines and all of that goes together. So I'm looking forward to it. Stay tuned, I guess, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, stay tuned for the next episode with Noelle Lansford. So nice one. All right, cool.